When I look around me and think of the suffering people endure in the world, to me it's blatantly obvious that much of this suffering could have been prevented by antinatalism. One of medicine's primary goals should be prevention of suffering. As I mentioned before, contraception is the ultimate preventive healthcare measure, and it's mind-boggling how this is not talked more about in medicine, though I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks this way. I used to think that suffering in the world is so evident and undesirable that I didn't even need to point out that fact. If one pays attention to everyday life, the badness of suffering is obvious. But working in medicine makes this even harder to ignore. Medicine wouldn't even be needed if it weren't for people suffering, which is caused by the body's natural tendency to break down. My whole job is to help people prevent and treat suffering. Every day I see people in my clinic struggle. Working in general practice means I see the whole spectrum of commonplace, disease-caused suffering. From the mildly depressed, to the disabled diabetic, to the recently hospitalized person with dementia who doesn't recognize his wife anymore. I see not only those afflicted with disease, but also their loved ones, who suffer alongside them. And yet, by reproducing, one ignores all this. One ignores the fact that our bodies start to decay as soon as they are formed. And suffering always comes along, whether it's by disease, injury, or aging. Some common retorts to this line of thinking are, "But that's life," or "Suffering is part of what allows us to grow," or "We come to appreciate things through suffering," or, my personal favorite, "By suffering ourselves, we ultimately are better able to help others in their suffering." These things may all be true, but they imply that either suffering is not so bad, or that it is all worth it. It's one thing to say this of an individual being's continuing existence, but it's another thing entirely to talk about suffering so callously when introducing an otherwise non-existent being into existence. These views on suffering all seem to ignore one crucial thing, that we have the power to avoid being directly responsible for starting a new individual's suffering and propagating this cycle. I remember once a patient in her early 60s with multiple medical problems said to me, "If I had known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself." In that one sentence, she expressed so many deep truths. She implied that many of the things she now endures could have been either prevented or made less bad had she taken some action. She implied that her current suffering is undesirable and regrettable. And she implied that her length of life doesn't match her quality of life. This moment of insight encapsulates a common theme I see in people, that deep down they prefer prevention over suffering. So even though people perform mental gymnastics to justify suffering, the vast majority of them don't desire going through it. Of course, if theoretical preference for prevention were so easy to carry out, there wouldn't be billions of people afflicted prematurely by preventable diseases. Prevention takes effort, and almost always involves giving up something now in return for a reward, or reduced suffering, later. Likewise, carrying out the preventive power of antinatalism is not easy for a lot of people, but it is simple to understand. By not bringing someone into existence, one avoids all suffering that would have occurred for that person. It's that simple. The unspoken assumption in this is that it is better to avoid suffering altogether than to gamble and hope that the person has minimal suffering with maximal joy. Arguably, this is what every loving parent wants for his or her child, for the child to suffer the least and be as happy as possible. Although I suppose this scenario can happen, it is hard to make the argument that it is anywhere near likely to happen. As enchanting as that scenario sounds, it is mostly an illusion. Perhaps the most dangerous illusion one can have. And, after all, Is a parent ready to accept that any suffering the child endures in his or her life would not have happened were it not for the parent? Is a parent ready to internalize that he or she is ultimately responsible for every painful moment, every crushing mental anguish, every agonizing last breath at the end of that person's life? Wouldn't the more loving thing be to spare one's child of this? There is only one way to guarantee a merciful alternative: not bringing the child into existence. Anything else is a gamble. So the question then is suffering the enemy? Should we take the path that guarantees avoiding this enemy? There have been various views proposed that basically call this approach cowardly, that calls the avoidance of suffering a pathetic way to go through life. I disagree with this perspective. It seems to me that you have to think very highly of yourself to feel that imposing suffering on a newborn is justified. It seems like you have to tell yourself suffering is somehow intrinsically good. We have to remember this is not just saying to an already existing person that suffering is necessary to achieve fruitful rewards. This is saying you will impose suffering on a child that would have otherwise not suffered. You are creating suffering anew. Is that really the most loving thing to do? Is that really what love is? Is it loving to cause the suffering and ultimately the death of your child? These are questions we must ask ourselves honestly. They're probably some of the most important questions we will ever ask ourselves. Thanks for listening.